I am Victoria, 32 years old, and I am a senior asset manager for a private equity firm in Manhattan. My husband Richard liked to tell people I was a consultant because it sounded less intimidating to his fragile ego. He spent his days playing the role of a high-flying executive, while I spent mine acquiring the companies that employed men like him. I managed the portfolio, I paid the mortgage, and I secured the future, while he secured the reservations. I lived in the shadows of his spotlight, comfortably letting him shine until the light burned him out. My husband went to London for a 10-day business trip, and I saw him off at the security gate at JFK Airport at 3 a.m. He kissed me on the cheek and told me he was doing this for us, for our future. He said the investors in the UK were demanding but necessary. I drove home in silence, thinking about the quarterly reports I needed to review. 2 days later, the phone rang. The digital clock on my nightstand read 3:14 a.m. It was a number I did not recognize with a country code that made my stomach drop. "This is Detective Inspector Graves from Scotland Yard." The voice on the other end was heavy with professional detachment. "Mrs. Victoria Reynolds." "Yes," I answered. Sitting up in the darkness, "I'm afraid I have some terrible news. We found your husband Richard Reynolds deceased in his suite at the Savoy Hotel approximately 2 hours ago. The cause appears to be accidental carbon monoxide poisoning from a faulty heating unit in the bathroom, combined with other factors we are still investigating." I did not scream. I did not drop the phone. My brain immediately shifted into crisis management mode. I asked for the details. I asked about the repatriation of the body. I asked about the police report number. But the detective hesitated. "There is one more thing, Mrs. Reynolds. Richard was not alone in the suite. He was found in the bathtub, and there was a young woman with him. She has also passed away." My hand tightened around the phone. A woman. I assumed it was a call girl. I assumed it was a momentary lapse of judgment that cost him his life. I asked if they had identified her. "We found a passport in her handbag," the detective said. "Her name is Jessica Vance, 22 years old, from Connecticut. Do you know her?" The air left my lungs. Jessica. My mother-in-law Beatrice's adopted niece. The golden child. The girl Beatrice constantly compared me to. Jessica was supposed to be in Paris on a painting fellowship that Beatrice claimed to be funding. Why was she in a bathtub in London with my husband? Before Beatrice realizes she destroyed her own son with her indulgence and lies, hit subscribe if you believe the truth always finds a way to surface even from a locked hotel suite across the ocean. I did not go back to sleep. I made coffee, I showered, I put on a black silk blouse and tailored trousers. I sat at the kitchen island of the house that was legally mine, but that Richard called his castle, and I waited. At 6:05 a.m., the pounding started. It was not a knock, it was an assault on the front door. I unlocked it and Beatrice pushed past me like a hurricane of expensive perfume and hysteria. Caroline, my sister-in-law, followed close behind, her eyes darting around the foyer as if she was already appraising the furniture for an estate sale. Marcus, Caroline's husband, brought up the rear. He gave me a curt nod, his face grim and unreadable, as he closed the door, shutting out the early morning gray. "He is dead!" Beatrice screamed. Her voice cracked with a theatrical grief that seemed designed for an audience. "My baby is dead, and you are standing here drinking coffee. How can you be so cold?" I took a sip from my mug. The coffee was hot and bitter. Beatrice grabbed my arm, her nails digging into the silk. "This is your fault, Victoria. You drove him to this. You and your coldness. You and your career. If you had been a better wife, he would not have felt the pressure to work himself to death across the ocean. He died alone in a cold hotel room because he was trying to provide for you." She did not know. She had no idea about the girl in the bathtub. I gently removed her hand from my arm. "He was not alone, Beatrice," I said calmly. She ignored me. She threw herself onto the velvet sofa, sobbing into her hands. Caroline did not comfort her mother. Instead, she walked straight to me. Her eyes were dry and calculating. "Victoria, we need to be practical," Caroline said, her voice low. "We need access to the safe. Richard told me he keeps the emergency cash and the life insurance documents in the master bedroom safe. We need to fly him home. We need to arrange a funeral befitting a Reynolds. Mom wants the mahogany casket and a service at St. Patrick's. That is going to cost at least $50,000 up front." I looked at Caroline. She was wearing a designer tracksuit that I knew Richard had paid for last Christmas. She assumed Richard was the source of the money. She assumed I was the one who needed an allowance. "The safe is locked, Caroline," I said, "and the combination died with him. Do not play games with me, Victoria." Caroline hissed. "You know the code. We need the money now. The funeral home will not take a check from us. They know we are grieving. We need Richard's black card. Where is his wallet?" "Richard's wallet is in London evidence storage," I said, my voice steady. "And even if it were here, the cards would not work. I froze all joint accounts 20 minutes ago." Beatrice stopped sobbing abruptly. She looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks. "You did what? You froze his money. My son is not even cold yet, and you are cutting us off. You greedy, heartless woman. He supported this entire family. He paid for Caroline's car. He paid for my country club membership. How dare you touch his money?" "It is not his money, Beatrice," I thought, but I did not say it yet. I wanted to see how far they would go. Marcus spoke up for the first time. His voice was deep and measured. "Beatrice, Caroline, calm down. Victoria is right to freeze the accounts. It is standard legal procedure when a primary account holder passes away. It prevents identity theft. We can figure out the expenses later. Right now, we need to focus on getting Richard back." Caroline spun on her husband. "Shut up, Marcus. You are just a lawyer. You do not understand how our family finances work. Richard took care of everything. Victoria is just trying to hoard it all for herself." I walked over to the side table, where I had placed the fax that the London police had sent over to my secure home printer. I picked up the paper. It was still warm. "I think you are all misunderstanding the situation," I said. "Beatrice, you said Richard died working hard. You said he died alone." "He did," Beatrice shrieked, standing up and pointing a shaking finger at me. "He died working for you." I handed the paper to Marcus. He read it. His eyes widened slightly, the only sign of shock he allowed himself. He looked up at me and then at Beatrice. "You need to read this," Beatrice, Marcus said softly. "I do not want to read her lies," Beatrice spat. "It is a police report, Beatrice," I said, "from Scotland Yard. Richard did not die at a conference center. He died in the hotel suite, in the bathtub, and he was not alone." Beatrice froze. Her face went pale, but then a look of defiant denial washed over her. "So what? Men have needs. Maybe he hired a massage therapist. Maybe he was lonely because his wife was too busy staring at spreadsheets to give him affection. I do not care if he was with a woman. As long as he loved his family, that is all that matters. You are not going to tarnish his memory because of one mistake." I watched her justify it. I watched her twist her own moral code to protect the image of her perfect son. She was willing to accept a prostitute over accepting that her son was a liar. "It was not a stranger, Beatrice," I said. Caroline snatched the paper from Marcus. She scanned the document. Her mouth fell open. She dropped the paper as if it were burning hot. "No," Caroline whispered. "No, that is impossible." "What is it?" Beatrice demanded, grabbing the paper from the floor. She squinted at the text. "Name of deceased female companion, Jessica Vance." The silence in the room was louder than Beatrice's screaming had been. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked. Beatrice stared at the paper. Her hands began to shake violently. "Jessica," she whispered. "But Jessica is in Paris. I sent her the tuition money last week. I spoke to her. She sent me a picture of the Eiffel Tower. She was in London." "Beatrice," I said, my voice cutting through the fog of her delusion. "She has been in London with Richard for the last 3 days. They checked in together under the names Mr. and Mrs. Reynolds." Beatrice collapsed. This time it was not theatrical. Her knees gave out and she crumbled onto the Persian rug. Caroline let out a high-pitched wail. "My Jessica!" Caroline screamed. "My baby cousin! She is dead! Richard killed her. He took her there and he killed her." Marcus looked at me. He saw the cold resolve in my eyes. He saw that I was not crying. He saw that I was not broken. He saw that I was calculating. I stepped over Beatrice's legs. I did not offer her a hand. I did not offer her a tissue. I walked to the landline phone on the marble console table. "Where are you going?" Caroline screamed, tears streaming down her face. "Mom is unconscious. Help her!" I picked up the receiver and dialed a number I knew by heart. "I am calling my attorney," I said. "You are calling a lawyer now," Caroline yelled. "My brother and cousin are dead and you are thinking about legal fees." "I am not calling about fees, Caroline. I am calling to start the eviction process for the apartment Jessica was living in, the one Beatrice co-signed for. And I am calling to make sure the insurance company knows that Richard died while committing a felony involving illicit narcotics found at the scene, which voids his policy." Beatrice groaned on the floor, stirring. I looked down at them. "You wanted the truth, Beatrice. The truth is expensive, and I am done paying for it." I turned my back on them and waited for my lawyer to answer. The sun was just beginning to rise over the garden, illuminating the swimming pool that Richard had insisted on building and that I had paid for. The water was still and blue. It looked peaceful, unlike the war that was about to begin inside my house. Beatrice emerged from her swoon, not like a grieving mother, but like a general regrouping after a minor tactical defeat. One moment she was crumpled on my Persian rug, a heap of velvet and denial, and the next she was sitting upright on the sofa, smoothing her skirt and fixing her hair. The tears had vanished as quickly as they had appeared, replaced by a look of steely, terrifying determination. I stood by the fireplace watching her resurrection with the cold detachment of a surgeon observing a tumor. I knew what was coming. Beatrice cared about two things in this world: her access to money and the Reynolds family reputation. In that order. "Victoria, sit down," Beatrice commanded, pointing to the armchair opposite her. "We need to talk about damage control." I did not sit. I remained standing, looking down at her. "I have nothing to discuss, Beatrice. The police report is clear." "The police report is a piece of paper," Beatrice snapped, waving her hand dismissively. "It is not the truth. The truth is what we tell people. The truth is what appears in the obituary. Do you have any idea what will happen if this gets out? Do you know what people will say about Richard? About Jessica? About me?" I tilted my head slightly. "I imagine they will say that your son was having an affair with your niece, and that they died together in a bathtub due to their own negligence. That seems to be the most accurate summary." Beatrice stood up, then her face flushing red. "You will not speak those words again. We are going to bury this, Victoria. Deep. For the sake of this family, you are going to help us construct a narrative that saves our dignity." Caroline chimed in, nodding vigorously as she stood beside her mother. "Mom is right, Victoria. We cannot let the tabloids get hold of this. Think of the scandal. Think of my position at the charity board." I looked at Caroline. She was more worried about her social standing at the local gala than the fact that her brother was dead. It was grotesque, but entirely predictable. "So what is your plan, Beatrice?" I asked, my voice devoid of emotion. "How do you propose to rewrite reality?" Beatrice took a deep breath, composing herself. "It is simple. Richard died of a heart attack. He was working himself to the bone for this family, for you, and his heart simply gave out. It is a tragedy of dedication, a noble death." I raised an eyebrow. "And Jessica? How do you explain the 22-year-old girl dead in the same room?" "She was not in the room," Beatrice said firmly, her eyes locking onto mine, daring me to contradict her. "Jessica was never in London. Jessica was in Paris on her art trip. She died in a car accident. A tragic, terrible car accident on a rainy night. The two events are completely unrelated. Just a horrific coincidence that struck our family twice in 1 week. We will hold separate funerals. Closed caskets. No one needs to see them. No one needs to know." I stared at her. The audacity was breathtaking. She was asking me, the wife who had just been betrayed, to orchestrate the cover-up of the affair. She wanted me to lie to the authorities, to the press, and to our friends so that she could maintain her illusion of moral superiority. "And how do you expect to pull this off?" I asked. "The bodies are in London under police custody. There are death certificates. There are records." "That is where you come in, Victoria," Beatrice said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You have money. We all know Richard handled the big investments, but you have access to the accounts. We need to bring them home immediately before the press gets wind of the official report. We need a private medical transport, a private jet." Caroline pulled out her phone, tapping away on a calculator app. I checked. A private repatriation service with a medical team and sealed transport will cost around $50,000, maybe a bit more to expedite the paperwork and ensure discretion. $50,000, Beatrice repeated. You will transfer the funds today, Victoria. You will hire the jet. You will sign the non-disclosure agreements with the transport company. You will bring my son and my niece home, and you will do it silently. I looked at the two of them. They looked at me with expectation, not with gratitude, but with entitlement. They truly believed that my role in this family was to be the silent banker, the fixer, the one who cleaned up their messes while they took the credit. They thought they were cornering me. They thought that by appealing to the family name, they were manipulating me. They did not realize they were handing me the weapon I would use to destroy them. I walked over to the window and looked out at the driveway where Marcus was pacing by his car. He had stepped out to take a call, presumably to distance himself from the insanity inside. Marcus was a good lawyer, a corporate shark when he needed to be, but a man who valued logic and evidence. He was the only one who had hesitated when the truth was revealed. He was the weak link in their chain of delusion. I turned back to Beatrice. $50,000 is a lot of money for a lie, Beatrice. It is a small price for dignity, she hissed. Unless you want the world to know you were a failure of a wife who could not keep her husband out of another woman's bed. The insult was meant to sting. It was meant to shame me into submission. Instead, it clarified my path. I knew exactly what I had to do. I needed Marcus. I needed him to see the financial reality before I dropped the final hammer. I needed him to be the one to uncover the fraud, not me. If I told him Richard was a thief, he might not believe me. If he saw the numbers himself, he would have no choice. Fine, I said. Beatrice and Caroline exchanged a look of triumph. They thought they had won. They thought I had folded. I will pay for the jet. I continued, my voice steady and cold. I will pay the $50,000. I will arrange for the private transport. And I will ensure that the narrative remains exactly as you wish. Richard the hero. Jessica, the tragic victim. Beatrice let out a long sigh, her shoulders relaxing. Good. I knew you would see reason, Victoria. You are a cold woman, but you are not stupid. You know that without the Reynolds name, you are nothing. However, I added, raising my hand to stop her premature victory lap, there is a condition. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. What condition? I cannot fly to London. I have to stay here and handle the local arrangements and deal with the press inquiries if they start calling. I need someone to go there and physically oversee the transfer. Someone who can ensure that the paperwork is handled with the discretion you require. I looked past Beatrice through the window at Marcus. Marcus goes, I said. Caroline frowned. Marcus. Why Marcus? He has a trial next week. He is busy. Because he is a lawyer, I replied smoothly. He knows how to handle international bureaucracy. He knows how to speak to the authorities to ensure the official cause of death is redacted or sealed before the bodies leave the country. If you go, Beatrice, you will be too emotional. If Caroline goes, she will likely panic at the first hurdle. Marcus is calm, Marcus is professional, and Marcus is family. Beatrice considered this. She looked at Caroline, then back at me. She saw the logic in it. She also saw an opportunity to have a man take charge which fit her archaic worldview. Fine, Beatrice said. Marcus can go. But you are paying for his ticket too. First class. Of course, I said. I will book it immediately. I watched them relax. They thought they had successfully bullied me into spending $50,000 to save their skins. They thought they were in control. They did not know that by sending Marcus to London, I was sending him directly to the source of the truth. I was sending him to collect the personal effects. I was sending him to speak to the police. And most importantly, I was making him the legal custodian of the transport, which meant he would have to sign documents that listed the true cause of death. But that was not enough. I needed Marcus to see the financial rot before he left. I picked up my phone. Go get Marcus, I said to Caroline. Tell him I need his passport details for the flight. And tell him I need his legal advice on the wire transfer forms. Since the amount is over $10,000, I want to make sure the bank does not flag it as suspicious activity given the circumstances. Caroline smirked. Finally relying on the men to handle the real business, are we? Good. I will get him. She walked out the front door, strutting like she had just won the lottery. I looked at Beatrice. She was already mentally planning the funeral, picking out the hymns, deciding which black dress would make her look the most sympathetic. "You should go rest, Beatrice," I said quietly. "You have a big performance ahead of you." She looked at me with a sneer. "It is not a performance, Victoria. It is survival. Something you know nothing about because you have always had it easy. You married into this family and we gave you everything. The least you can do is pay the bill." She turned and walked up the stairs to the guest room she treated as her own. I waited until I heard the door click shut. The silence returned to the living room, but the air was thick with the toxicity they had left behind. I walked to my desk in the study and opened my laptop. I logged into the main trust account. The balance was lower than it should have been. Richard had been draining it systematically, but I still had the reserves they did not know about. I prepared the transfer for the $50,000. It was a significant sum, but it was an investment in my freedom. The front door opened, and Marcus walked in, followed by Caroline. He looked tired. He looked like a man who wanted to be anywhere else but here. "Victoria," Marcus said, his voice low, "Caroline says you agreed to pay for the transport, and that you want me to go to London." "Yes, Marcus," I said, turning the laptop screen slightly away from them. "I think it is best. You are the only one who can ensure this is handled legally. Beatrice wants a specific narrative. I need you to make sure we do not break any laws that could come back to haunt us." Marcus nodded slowly. He understood the subtext. He knew Beatrice was asking for a cover-up. He appreciated that I was trying to protect them legally, even if he did not agree with the morality of it. "I need to book the flight," I said, "and I need to authorize the wire transfer for the medical jet. But Marcus, before you go, I need you to review the liability waiver the transport company sent over. It references the estate's solvency." I handed him a tablet. On the screen was not a liability waiver. It was a summary of Richard's recent credit card activity, the specific card he had used in London, the one that was linked to the account I was about to pay from. Marcus took the tablet, adjusting his glasses. He looked at the screen expecting legalese. Instead, he saw a list of transactions: the Savoy Hotel, Cartier London, the Ivy Restaurant, a withdrawal of £5,000 in cash, and then a charge for a jagged diamond necklace from a boutique in Bond Street dated the day he died. Marcus frowned. "Victoria, what is this?" I feigned ignorance. "Oh, I apologize. That might be the wrong file. That is just the credit card statement from the trip. Richard must have been buying gifts for Beatrice and Caroline." Marcus looked closer. He scrolled down. He saw the dates. He saw the amounts. He saw the second hotel room booking under the name Jessica Vance. It was right there on the statement, paid for by Richard. He looked up at me. His eyes were wide. He realized instantly that Beatrice's story about Jessica being in Paris was a lie that Richard had financed. He realized that his wife and mother-in-law were not just protecting a reputation, they were protecting a crime scene of betrayal. I took the tablet back gently. "I am sorry, Marcus. Let me find the right document. We can pretend you did not see that, just like Beatrice wants us to pretend." Marcus stood there silent. The gears in his head were turning. He looked at Caroline, who was busy texting on her phone, oblivious to the fact that her husband had just seen proof of her brother's depravity. "Book the flight." "Victoria," Marcus said, his voice harder than before. "I will go to London. I will bring them back, and I will make sure everything is done by the book." "Thank you, Marcus," I said. I watched him walk away to the window, his back stiff with suppressed anger. He was no longer just a passive observer. He was now a witness. I had planted the seed. In London, the soil would be fertile enough for it to grow into the evidence that would destroy them all. I pressed enter on the transfer. $50,000 gone. But the game had just truly begun. The interior of the St. Jude funeral home was designed to make death feel like a VIP event. The walls were paneled in dark mahogany, and the carpet was so thick it swallowed the sound of our footsteps. It smelled of lilies and floor wax, a scent that was meant to be comforting, but just smelled like expensive decay to me. I stood by the entrance wearing a black dress that cost more than my first car, holding a clutch that contained my phone and my silence. Beatrice was already in the center of the showroom, commanding the space as if she were directing a play rather than burying her son. She walked between the rows of caskets, trailing her fingers along the polished wood, her face set in a mask of tragic nobility. Caroline followed a step behind, nodding at everything her mother said, playing the role of the grieving sister to perfection. They had forgotten I was there, or perhaps they simply considered me part of the furniture, a necessary but invisible prop in their family drama. The funeral director, Mr. Sterling, was a tall, thin man with a voice like oiled velvet. He hovered near Beatrice, his hands clasped in front of him, sensing the desperation for status that radiated off her. He knew exactly what kind of client she was, the kind who confused price tags with love, the kind who thought that spending money could rewrite history. "We have the classic oak here," Mr. Sterling said, gesturing to a sturdy, sensible casket. "It is dignified and understated, very popular for distinguished gentlemen." Beatrice wrinkled her nose as if he had offered her a cardboard box. "Understated," she repeated with a sneer. "My son was not understated, Mr. Sterling. My son was a Reynolds. He was a leader, a visionary. He deserves a resting place that reflects his stature." She walked past the oak and stopped in front of a massive casket made of high-gloss cherry wood with gold handles. It looked less like a coffin and more like a piece of furniture from a dictator's palace. "This one," Beatrice said, patting the lid. "What is this one?" "That is the monarch," Mr. Sterling said, his eyes lighting up. Solid cherry hand rubbed finish with 24-karat gold hardware. The interior is lined with crushed velvet imported from France. It is our most exclusive model. "We will take it," Beatrice said instantly. "And I want the interior changed. Cream velvet, not white. White is too common. And for the flowers, I want white roses. But not just any roses. I want the long-stemmed ones from Ecuador. And lilies, hundreds of lilies. I want the sanctuary to smell like a garden in heaven." I stood in the shadows watching her spend money she did not have. It was fascinating in a morbid way. She was ordering thousands of dollars worth of flowers for a man she had enabled to cheat. She was buying a gold-handled box for a son who had died in a hotel bathtub with his cousin. It was all a performance, a desperate attempt to cover the stench of scandal with the perfume of wealth. Caroline chimed in, pulling out her phone. "And we need a catering service for the reception. Something elegant, champagne and caviar. Richard loved caviar. He actually hated caviar. He only ate it when he wanted to impress clients." But I said nothing. I let them build their tower of debt. Mr. Sterling was tapping furiously on his tablet, calculating the total. He looked up with a solemn but pleased expression. "Excellent choices, madam. The monarch is a truly fitting tribute. And with the imported floral arrangements, the expedited shipping for the casket and the catering package we are looking at, a total of roughly $45,000. Beatrice did not blink. She reached into her purse and pulled out a black card. It was heavy, made of titanium. It had Richard's name on it. It was the supplementary card linked to the main account, the account that I funded, the account that Richard used to play the big shot while I did the actual work. "Put it on this," Beatrice said, extending the card with a flourish. "And add a 20% tip for your staff, Mr. Sterling. We appreciate your discretion and service during this difficult time." Mr. Sterling took the card with two hands, treating it like a holy relic. "Of course, Mrs. Reynolds. Thank you. If you could just wait one moment, I will process this and we can finalize the paperwork." He walked over to the antique desk in the corner of the room where the credit card terminal sat. The room was silent. The only sound was the soft hum of the air conditioning and the rustle of Beatrice's silk dress as she adjusted her shawl. She looked at me for the first time since we entered. "You see, Victoria," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "This is how you honor a husband. You do not ask about the price. You give him the best. It is a shame you never understood that while he was alive." I met her gaze. My face was a blank canvas. I did not frown. I did not smile. I just waited. There was a beep from the corner of the room, a sharp, mechanical sound that cut through the hush. Mr. Sterling frowned. He looked at the machine, then at the card. He swiped it again. Beep! He typed in the numbers manually, his fingers moving quickly. He waited. Beep! The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, awkward. Mr. Sterling cleared his throat. He walked back to us, his polished demeanor showing a small crack. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, his voice slightly higher than before, "I am afraid there seems to be an issue with the card. The transaction has been declined." Beatrice laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. "That is impossible. That is a black card. It has no limit. You must have done it wrong. Try it again." "I have tried it 3 times, Madam," Mr. Sterling said apologetically. "The system says the issuer has placed a hold on the account. Perhaps it is a fraud alert. It happens sometimes with large transactions." "It is not a fraud alert," Beatrice snapped, snatching the card back. "It is my son's card. He is Richard Reynolds. His credit is impeccable." She glared at the machine as if she could intimidate it into working. "Here, use the chip." Mr. Sterling took the card back and inserted it into the reader. We all watched the small screen. Beatrice held her breath. Caroline tapped her foot impatiently. I stood perfectly still, my pulse steady. "Declined." The word flashed on the screen in red letters. Mr. Sterling handed the card back. "I am sorry, madam. It is not going through. Do you have another form of payment?" Beatrice's face turned a mottled shade of red. "This is ridiculous. I am going to sue the bank. They are embarrassing me at my son's funeral." Caroline stepped forward, opening her designer handbag. "Don't worry, Mom. It is probably just a glitch because Richard is gone. The bank probably saw the obituary notice or something. Use mine." She pulled out her own card. A platinum card, also issued under Richard's account, also paid for by me. "Here," Caroline said, handing it to Mr. Sterling with a smug look at me. "Use this one and keep the tip." Mr. Sterling took the second card. He looked relieved. He inserted it. We waited. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Beep. Declined. The air left the room. Mr. Sterling looked at the card, then at Caroline. "I am sorry, miss. This one is declined as well. Code 41, lost or stolen." What Caroline shrieked. "It is not stolen. It is my card. Richard gave it to me." Beatrice looked at Caroline, then at Mr. Sterling, and finally her eyes landed on me. She saw me standing there in my black dress, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. She saw the lack of surprise on my face. She saw the cold, hard truth staring back at her. I had made the call 20 minutes after the police hung up. I had reported Richard's death to the credit bureaus. I had flagged all joint accounts for probate, and I had reported the supplementary cards, the ones Beatrice and Caroline used, as compromised, since the primary cardholder was deceased. Mr. Sterling looked between us, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. "Perhaps Mrs. Reynolds has a card," he suggested, looking at me hopefully. I did not move to open my purse. I did not reach for my wallet. I just looked at Beatrice. I watched her realization sink in. She knew. She knew that the river of money she had been swimming in for years had dried up the moment Richard's heart stopped. She realized that the luxury she felt entitled to was not hers. It never was. The silence stretched out, agonizing and delicious. Beatrice clutching the useless piece of titanium. Caroline staring at the card reader in disbelief. Mr. Sterling holding a bill for $45,000. I took a small step forward, the heels of my shoes clicking sharply on the hardwood floor. "There is no mistake, Beatrice," I said, my voice low and smooth like a blade sliding through silk. Beatrice looked at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "I locked the accounts," I said. "The bank didn't do it. I did." You, what?" Beatrice stammered. "You canceled the cards." "At a time like this." I walked past her and ran my hand along the edge of the cherrywood casket. It was cool to the touch. "Richard is dead, Beatrice, and dead men don't pay bills." I turned to face them. "Seems Richard maxed out his limit in London," I said, delivering the words with surgical precision. "All those hotels, the jewelry, the cash withdrawals, it adds up." I looked at the invoice in Mr. Sterling's hand, then back at Beatrice's terrified face. "So unless you want to put him in a pine box, you are going to have to pay for this yourself." I paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "Do you want to use your retirement funds, Mother?" Beatrice gasped. Her hand went to her throat. She didn't have retirement funds. I knew that. She had spent everything years ago banking on Richard, and by extension, me, to support her until she died. I can't access," she stuttered. Then I suggest you downgrade the casket, I said, turning toward the door, and maybe skip the caviar. I walked out of the showroom, leaving them standing there with the declined cards and the gold-handled coffin they couldn't afford. I didn't look back, but I heard Mr. Sterling's voice shift. It was no longer oily and polite. It was cold and businesslike. "So, madam, how will you be settling this bill today?" I stepped out into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. The air was fresh. It smelled of exhaust and freedom. One conflict down, but the war was far from over. I checked my watch. Marcus would be landing in London in 4 hours. The real show was just beginning. While Beatrice was downstairs frantically making phone calls trying to secure a high-interest loan to cover the funeral costs she had foolishly committed to, I sat in the quiet sanctuary of my home office with Marcus. The contrast between the chaos below and the stillness above was absolute. Downstairs was a desperate attempt to maintain a facade. Upstairs was the brutal dismantling of one. I sat behind my mahogany desk, the surface clear, except for a single leather-bound folder and a pot of Earl Grey tea. Marcus sat opposite me. He had his travel bag by his feet, ready for the flight to London that I had paid for. He looked exhausted. The scene at the funeral home had shaken him, not because of the money, but because of the sheer entitlement his wife's family displayed. He was a man who had built his career from nothing, fighting against prejudices that people like Beatrice politely held behind closed doors. He valued hard work and integrity. I knew that was the key to unlocking his loyalty. I poured him a cup of tea without asking. He took it, his hands large and steady. "The flight leaves in 4 hours. Marcus," I said, taking a sip of my own tea. "But before you go, there is something you need to see. It concerns the probate process." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "Victoria, if this is about the credit cards again, I get it. Richard was spending beyond his means. Beatrice is in denial. I will handle the legal side of the debts. You do not have to worry." I shook my head slowly. "It is not about debt, Marcus. It is about theft." I opened the leather folder and slid a stack of documents across the desk toward him. They were bank statements, but not the ones I had shown him earlier. These were the statements for my family trust, the capital that I had brought into the marriage, the money that was supposed to be untouchable. "Look at the withdrawals," I said, pointing to a series of highlighted transactions. Marcus put on his glasses and leaned in. He traced the lines with his finger. July 15th, wire transfer, $200,000. August 1st, wire transfer, $350,000. September 10th, wire transfer, $500,000. He looked up at me, frowning. "Who authorized these?" "The recipient is listed as RR Ventures LLC. Is that Richard's company?" "It is a shell company Richard set up." I explained, my voice devoid of anger, only facts. He forged my signature on the authorization letters. I only found out during the quarterly audit 2 days ago, just before he died. In total, he siphoned off $2 million from my trust in the last 6 months. Marcus sat back in his chair, the leather creaking. $2 million. That is grand larceny, Victoria. That is prison time. "It gets worse," I said. "I had my forensic accountant trace where the money went from the LLC. Richard was not investing it. He was spending it. But not on cars or gambling." I slid a second document across the desk. It was a property deed, a certified copy I had pulled from the public records that morning. He bought a penthouse apartment in the Upper East Side, I said. A 2-bedroom condo with a view of the park, paid in full, cash. Marcus looked at the deed. He read the address. Then his eyes dropped to the line listed as owners. He froze. The silence in the room became suffocating. I could hear the faint sound of Beatrice shouting at someone on the phone downstairs, but it sounded miles away. "Read the names, Marcus," I whispered. He read them out loud, his voice hollow. "Jessica Vance and Beatrice Reynolds." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief and horror. "Beatrice. Beatrice is on the deed." I nodded. "My mother-in-law co-owns the apartment that my husband bought with my stolen money for his mistress, who happens to be her niece." Marcus stood up, pacing the small room. This is insane. You are telling me Beatrice knew. She knew about the affair. She did not just know Marcus." I said, leaning forward, my hands clasped on the desk. "She facilitated it. She encouraged it. That apartment was their love nest. Beatrice signed the papers. She helped Richard hide the money. She helped him set up a second life right under my nose. But why, Marcus asked, turning to face me, his hands clenched into fists. Why would a mother do that? Why would she help her son destroy his marriage? Why would she help him sleep with her own niece? It is perverse. Because she hates me, Marcus, I said simply. He looked at me confused. Hates you. You pay for everything. You gave them this life. Exactly, I said. That is why she hates me. She hates that Richard needed me. She hates that I am the one with the power, the one with the career, the one who writes the checks. In her twisted mind, I emasculated him by being successful. So she helped him find a woman she could control, a woman who was dependent, a woman who looked up to them. Jessica was perfect. She was young, she was family, she was pliable. Beatrice wanted Richard to feel like a king, and since I wouldn't play the role of the submissive subject, she helped him build a kingdom elsewhere. Marcus looked at the deed again, shaking his head as if trying to clear a nightmare. This is sick. This is absolutely sick. I knew Beatrice was snobbish. I knew she was difficult. But this is financial abuse. It is moral bankruptcy. And there is one more thing, I said, delivering the final blow. I handed him a printout of an email chain. It was between Richard and Beatrice, dated a week before the trip to London. Read the last email from Beatrice, I said. Marcus picked it up. He read it silently, his lips moving slightly. Don't worry about Victoria finding out. She is too busy with her mergers to notice anything. Just take Jessica to London. Enjoy yourselves. You deserve to be happy, my darling boy. I will handle things here. And if she ever does find out, we will just say the apartment was an investment for the family trust. She will never sue her own mother-in-law. Marcus dropped the paper on the desk. He looked like he was about to be sick. He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. I am sorry, Victoria, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I am so sorry. I had no idea. I know you didn't, I said softly. You are a good man, Marcus. You have worked hard for everything you have. You value honor. That is why I am showing you this, because I know you cannot be part of this. Marcus looked at the door leading to the hallway where his wife and mother-in-law were. He looked at me. The conflict in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I am done, he said. What do you mean? I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. I am done with them, Marcus said, his voice rising in strength. I am done with the excuses. I am done with the entitlement. I entered this family thinking they were eccentric but decent. I thought they had class. But they are just grifters in Gucci. They are criminals. He walked back to the desk and placed his hands on the mahogany surface, leaning in close to me. Victoria, you need to protect yourself. That money, the $2 million, we can get it back. I looked at him, assessing his sincerity. How? The apartment is in their names. It was purchased with stolen funds. Marcus set his lawyer brain kicking into high gear. It is proceeds of crime. We can file a civil suit for conversion. We can place a lien on the property immediately. We can freeze Beatrice's assets, what little she has left. But Beatrice's family, I said, testing him one last time. Not anymore, Marcus said coldly. Family does not steal from you. Family does not conspire to humiliate you. She is an accomplice to fraud. And Caroline... He paused, looking at the wedding band on his finger. Does Caroline know? I asked. Marcus shook his head slowly. I don't know, but she is downstairs right now helping her mother lie to a loan shark to pay for a funeral for a man who stole $2 million from you. She is just as bad. She enables them. She benefits from the theft even if she doesn't know the specifics. He took a deep breath and looked me in the eye. Victoria, I am going to London. I will bring the bodies back because that is the decent thing to do. But when I come back, I am not their lawyer. I am yours. I felt a small spark of triumph in my chest. I had won him over, not by manipulation, but by the sheer weight of the truth. Thank you, Marcus, I said. I will draw up the papers on the plane. He continued pacing again, his mind working fast. We will file for an emergency injunction to prevent them from selling the apartment. We will file a claim against Richard's estate, which is effectively insolvent. So we will go after the co-conspirators. That means Beatrice. By the time the funeral happens, she will have been served with a lawsuit for $2 million plus damages." He stopped and looked at me. "And Victoria, about the funeral costs? The $50,000. Yes," I said. "Do not pay it," he said firmly. I tilted my head. "But I promised." "Screw the promise," he said. "They stole $2 million. Let them figure out how to bury him. Or better yet, let the state bury him. Why should you pay for the man who betrayed you to be buried in gold?" I smiled a genuine smile for the first time in days. It was small and cold, but it was there. "Because Marcus," I said, "I want them to have the funeral. I want them to gather all their friends, all the society people they try so hard to impress. I want them to stand there and give their speeches." "Why?" Marcus asked, confused. "Because that is when we will destroy them," I said. "If I cut them off now, they play the victim. They tell the world I am the evil widow. But if I let them have their stage, and then I pull the curtain down, the humiliation will be absolute." Marcus looked at me for a long moment. He saw the fire behind my calm exterior. He saw the years of disrespect I had swallowed. And he nodded. "You are dangerous, Victoria," he said with a mix of fear and admiration. "I am just a woman who balanced the books, Marcus." He picked up the file and put it in his briefcase. "I will keep the originals safe," he said. "I will make copies in London. You stay here. Let them think you are just the bank. Let them think you are passive. When I get back, we will light the match together." He zipped up his bag and walked to the door. He paused with his hand on the handle. "For the record," he said, looking back, "I always liked you better than them. You are the only one in this house who actually earned your place." Then he walked out, leaving me alone in the silence. I turned my chair to face the window, looking out at the sprawling lawn. Downstairs I heard a cheer. Beatrice must have secured the loan. She probably thought she had saved the day. She had no idea that the man she sent to save her reputation was now carrying the ammunition to end it. I picked up my tea. It was still warm. I took a sip and savored the taste of anticipation. The pieces were all in place. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for the funeral. The service at St. Patrick's Cathedral was exactly what Beatrice had ordered. It was a spectacle of sorrow designed to be photographed and gossiped about for months. The nave was filled with the scent of 5,000 Ecuadorian white roses, a smell so thick and cloying it felt like inhaling perfume directly from the bottle. The organ music vibrated through the floorboards, a deep, mournful sound that was meant to evoke the gravity of a great statesman's passing, rather than the overdose of a man who died cheating on his wife. I sat in the front pew, the designated seat for the grieving widow. I wore a simple black dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shielded my eyes. Not because I was crying, but because I did not want them to see the look of absolute contempt I was struggling to suppress. To my right sat Beatrice and Caroline. They were dressed in matching couture morning gowns, intricate layers of black lace and silk that cost more than most people's cars. Beatrice clutched a handkerchief to her chest, her knuckles white. She was vibrating with a mixture of adrenaline and fear. She knew the check for this extravaganza was going to bounce unless she secured that loan. She was banking everything on this performance. The pews behind us were packed. Beatrice had invited everyone: the country club board, the charity committee members, business rivals people Richard hadn't spoken to in high school. She needed a full house. She needed witnesses to her tragedy so that when the collection plate went around or when she asked for sympathy loans later, the narrative would already be established. The priest, a man who had clearly been coached by Beatrice on what to say, gave a generic sermon about forgiveness and the mystery of God's plan. He didn't know Richard. He spoke of a man who loved deeply and lived passionately. It was a safe script. But the main event was not the priest. It was Beatrice. When the time came for the eulogy, Beatrice stood up. She paused for effect, waiting for the rustling of fabric and the coughing to die down until the silence was absolute. She walked slowly to the pulpit, her hand resting on the gold handle of the monarch casket as she passed it. She caressed the wood as if it were Richard's cheek. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She climbed the steps and adjusted the microphone. She looked out at the sea of faces, her eyes glistening with tears that I knew she could summon on command. "My friends," she began, her voice trembling just enough to sound broken, but loud enough to reach the back row. Thank you for being here. Thank you for honoring my son, my Richard." She took a shaky breath. Richard was the light of my life. From the moment he was born, I knew he was special. He had a heart that was too big for this world. He felt things so deeply. He gave so much of himself to everyone he met. He was a giver in a world of takers. I stared at the back of the pew in front of me. Richard was a taker. He took my money. He took my patience. He took my trust. He had never given anything without expecting a return on investment. Beatrice continued, her eyes sweeping over the crowd before landing briefly accusingly on me. But that generosity came at a cost. Richard carried a heavy burden. He felt the weight of responsibility for this family on his shoulders every single day. He wanted to provide. He wanted to be the strong protector. But he was sensitive. He needed love. He needed softness. He needed a home that was a sanctuary, not a boardroom. A ripple of whispers went through the crowd. The accusation was subtle but sharp. She was painting a picture of Richard as the martyr crushed by the demands of a cold, ambitious wife. He worked so hard, Beatrice said, her voice rising with emotion. He worked until his heart literally gave out. He pushed himself to the limit, flying across the ocean, taking meetings at all hours, trying to secure a future for us. And I fear that in his drive to be successful, he felt unappreciated. He felt alone. She pulled the handkerchief to her face and let out a sob. Caroline reached out and touched her arm, performing the role of the supportive daughter. "I remember the last time we spoke," Beatrice said through her tears. "He sounded so tired. He said, 'Mom, I just want to make everyone happy. I just want to be enough.' And I told him, 'Richard, you are more than enough. You are everything.' But sometimes even a mother's love cannot fill the void left by others." The heads in the rows behind me turned. I could feel their eyes boring into my back. The judgment was palpable. Beatrice had successfully cast me as the villain. I was the ice queen who had driven her warm, loving husband to an early grave. I remained motionless. I did not slouch. I did not look down. I let them stare. Beatrice wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. "But I do not want to dwell on the tragedy of his death," she said, shifting gears. "I want to celebrate the nobility of his life. Because my son was not just a businessman. He was a humanitarian." I blinked. This was new. Richard's idea of charity was rounding up his bill at Starbucks. "Many of you know that Richard was in London for business," Beatrice said, her voice gaining strength. "But what you do not know, because he was too humble to brag about it, is the nature of that business. Richard was not there to close a deal for himself. He was there to launch a new initiative, a foundation dedicated to helping underprivileged youth find their way in the arts." I tightened my grip on my clutch. The arts! Jessica was an art student. Beatrice was weaving the mistress into the lie, turning the affair into a saintly mission. "He called it the Jessica Project," Beatrice said, and for a second I thought she had lost her mind. I thought she was going to confess. But she continued without missing a beat. "Named after his cousin, whom he loved like a sister. He wanted to honor our family's commitment to beauty and creativity." She gestured to the side of the altar. "I have asked Richard's dearest friend and business partner, Julian, to say a few words about this project." Julian was with Richard in spirit during those final days. He knows the sacrifice my son made. Julian stood up from the second pew. Julian was a man I had banned from my house 3 years ago. He was a sycophant, a gambler, and Richard's partner in every vice. He wore a suit that was slightly too shiny and a mournful expression that looked practiced in a mirror. He walked to the pulpit and hugged Beatrice. She clung to him for a moment, reinforcing the image that he was the true family, while I was the outsider. "Thank you, Beatrice," Julian said, his voice smooth and oily. "And to Victoria, my deepest condolences." He didn't look at me. He looked at the camera crew Beatrice had hired to film the service. "I spoke to Richard just hours before he passed," Julian told the crowd. "He was exhausted, but he was exhilarated. We had been working on this project for months. Richard had a vision. He saw the poverty in the inner cities of London. He saw the kids with talent but no resources. And he said, 'Julian, we have to do something. We have to use our privilege to lift them up.' I watched Julian lie with the ease of a sociopath. There was no project. There were no kids. That is why he was in London, Julian continued. He was scouting locations for a community center. He was meeting with local artists. He was walking the streets in the rain looking for the perfect building to buy. He wasn't staying in the boardroom. He was out there doing the work. Julian paused, looking down at the casket. I told him to slow down. I told him, Richard, take a break. Come home to your wife. But he said, Julian, I can't. If I don't do this, who will? He sacrificed his time, his energy, and ultimately his life for those kids. He died a hero, a silent hero. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Handkerchiefs were dabbed at eyes. They bought it. They bought the whole story. Richard the saint, Beatrice the grieving mother, and me the absent cold wife who didn't even know her husband was saving the world. Julian looked up, his eyes locking with Beatrice's, and I know Julian added, his voice dropping to a whisper, that if Richard were here today, he would want us to continue his work. He would want us to ensure that his dream does not die with him. That is why Beatrice and I are establishing the Richard Reynolds Memorial Fund today, to finish what he started. Beatrice nodded solemnly, tears streaming down her face again. Julian stepped down and Beatrice returned to the microphone. Thank you, Julian, she said. Thank you for speaking the truth when others refused to see it. She looked directly at me then. It was a challenge, a glare that said, I have won. I have rewritten history, and there is nothing you can do about it. My son died alone, she whispered into the microphone, the sound amplified to fill the vaulted ceiling. But he did not die in vain. He was a good man, a faithful man, a man of honor, and I will not let anyone tarnish his name. She stood there soaking in the adoration and the pity. She looked like a queen on her throne made of lies. She believed she had pulled it off. She believed that by layering enough expensive flowers and noble lies over the corpse, she could hide the smell of rot. I sat there, and I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was anticipation. It was the feeling of watching a house of cards reach its final precarious height just before you open the window. Beatrice had made a fatal error. She had invited the world to witness her lie. She had brought Julian into it, making him a co-conspirator, and she had centered the entire eulogy around a London trip that was documented in a police report that was currently sitting in Marcus's briefcase on a plane descending toward Heathrow. She thought this eulogy was her victory lap. She didn't realize it was her confession. I checked my watch. Marcus would have landed. He would have the documents. And I had the microphone next. Beatrice stepped down from the pulpit, supported by Caroline. The crowd seemed ready to applaud. It was sickening. It was perfect. The priest stood up. Thank you, Mrs. Reynolds, for those moving words. And now we have a few words from Richard's wife, Victoria. The silence that fell over the room was different this time. It wasn't respectful. It was icy. It was expectant. They wanted to see the monster. They wanted to see the woman who hadn't loved the hero enough. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I picked up my clutch. I walked past Beatrice. She hissed a whisper at me as I passed. Don't you dare ruin this. Stick to the script. I looked at her. I smiled. A small, genuine smile. I intend to honor him, Beatrice, I whispered back. I intend to tell the world exactly who he was. I walked up the steps to the pulpit. I placed my clutch on the stand. I looked out at the hundreds of faces. I saw the judgment. I saw the disdain. I saw the curiosity. I adjusted the microphone. I took a breath. I let the silence stretch for 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Until they were leaning forward. I looked at the casket. Then I looked at Julian. Then I looked at Beatrice. And then I began. I walked toward the altar, and the sound of my heels on the marble floor echoed through the silent cathedral like gunshots. Every eye was on me. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and judgment. Beatrice had just finished painting me as the villain of this story, and now the audience was waiting for the villain to speak. They expected tears. They expected a breakdown. Or perhaps they expected me to run out of the church in shame. They did not expect me to smile. As I reached the front row, Beatrice shot out of her seat. Her hand clamped onto my wrist with surprising strength. Her nails dug into my skin through the fabric of my dress. Her eyes were wide with panic. She knew. Somewhere deep inside that fortress of denial, she knew that I was not going to stick to her script. Sit down, Victoria, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You are distraught. You are not well. Let me handle this. Do not embarrass us." I looked down at her hand. I did not pull away. I simply looked at it as if it were a stain on my dress. "Let go, Beatrice," I said softly. She tightened her grip. "No, I will not let you ruin this. Go back to your seat." Suddenly a shadow fell over us. Marcus was there. He had arrived straight from the airport, still wearing his travel clothes, carrying a leather briefcase that looked heavy with evidence. He stepped between us, his large frame blocking Beatrice's view of the congregation. He gently but firmly removed Beatrice's hand from my wrist. "Let her speak," Beatrice Marcus said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a judge passing sentence. Beatrice looked at Marcus, then at me. She saw the look in his eyes. It was a look of disgust. She realized then that her ally had crossed the line. She realized that whatever he had found in London had turned him against her. She stumbled back slightly, catching herself on the edge of the pew. I walked past her. I did not look back. I climbed the 3 steps to the pulpit. The wood was cool under my hands. I adjusted the microphone. I looked out at the sea of faces. 500 of society's elite. Bankers, politicians, charity board members. People who judged their worth by their net worth. People who lived for scandal, as long as it wasn't their own. I let the silence stretch. I waited until the coughing stopped. I waited until the rustling of programs ceased. I waited until the tension was so high that it felt like a physical weight pressing down on the room. I looked at the casket, the ridiculous gold-handled monarch that Beatrice had bought with a declined credit card. Then I looked at Beatrice. She was sitting on the edge of her seat, pale and trembling, clutching Caroline's hand. "Mother Beatrice is right," I began, my voice clear and steady, amplifying through the speakers. A ripple of confusion went through the room. They expected a fight. They didn't expect agreement. Beatrice relaxed slightly, her shoulders dropping. She thought I had surrendered. She thought I was going back to the script. "Richard was a man of passion," I continued, and as Beatrice said, he loved his family. He loved his family so much that he couldn't bear to be apart from them, even on business trips. He needed that connection. He needed that familiarity. I paused, looking directly at Julian, the friend who had lied about the charity project. "Julian told you about the Jessica project. He told you about Richard's dedication to the arts, about his desire to help the youth. It was a beautiful story, Julian, truly moving." Julian shifted in his seat, loosening his tie. He didn't like the way I said his name, but there was a small detail that was omitted. I said, my tone hardening just a fraction. A detail that I think perfectly illustrates the depth of Richard's love. You see, the Jessica Project wasn't a charity. It wasn't a building. And it wasn't about helping underprivileged children. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a single piece of paper. It was the death certificate Marcus had handed to me as we passed each other. The Jessica Project was a person. I looked up and locked eyes with Beatrice. Richard loved his family so much that he spent the final moments of his life in London, not in a boardroom, not in a community center, but in the bathtub of the Savoy Hotel. And he wasn't alone. He was with family. He was with the person Beatrice here loves most in the world. The room was deadly silent. You could hear a pin drop. "He was with your niece Jessica." I said the name ringing out like a bell. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the cathedral. It was a physical sound, a wave of shock. People turned to each other, mouths open. Beatrice let out a strangled cry, but I did not stop. Yes, I continued, my voice rising over the murmurs. Richard and Jessica, uncle and niece, they were so committed to their love that they died together, wrapped in each other's arms, a true Romeo and Juliet for the modern age. Beatrice stood up screaming, "Stop her! Cut the microphone! She is lying. She is crazy with grief," but no one moved. The sound engineer was too shocked to react. The priest stood frozen by the altar. The audience was paralyzed by the sheer scandalous magnitude of the revelation. "I am not lying, Beatrice," I said calmly, holding up the paper. "I have the official report from Scotland Yard right here. Cause of death, accidental overdose. Time of death, 3 a.m. Location, the Savoy. Occupants of the room, Mr. Richard Reynolds and Miss Jessica Vance." I looked at the crowd. Beatrice told you Jessica was in Paris painting. She told you Richard was working himself to death. But the truth is, they were on a 10-day vacation funded by the money Richard stole from my company." Beatrice collapsed back into the pew. She didn't faint this time. She just sat there staring at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. Her social standing was vaporizing in real time. The whispers were turning into loud conversations. I could see people pulling out their phones, texting the news. The Reynolds family name was being destroyed, and I was the one holding the sledgehammer. But I wasn't done. I had destroyed their reputation. Now I had to destroy their future. I looked down at the donation baskets that had been passed around earlier. They were full of envelopes, checks from wealthy friends who thought they were supporting a grieving widow. "There is one more thing," I said. The room quieted down again. They wanted more. They were hungry for blood. Beatrice mentioned that Richard was the provider, that he carried the financial weight of this family. She forgot to mention that for the last 6 months, Richard and Beatrice had been systematically draining my personal trust fund. I saw the color drain from Caroline's face. She looked at her mother in horror. $2 million, I said. That is the amount they took. They used it to buy a penthouse in Manhattan, an apartment meant to be a love nest for Richard and Jessica, an apartment that Beatrice here co-signed for. I gestured to Beatrice, who was now sobbing into her hands, her humiliation complete. She knew. She encouraged it. She helped her son cheat on her daughter-in-law with her own niece because she wanted to control him. She wanted a puppet, and I refused to be one. I looked at the donation baskets again, so I want to thank you all for your generosity today. Your donations to the Richard Reynolds Memorial Fund are greatly appreciated. But since the fund doesn't exist, and since the estate is bankrupt, I am making an executive decision. I leaned into the microphone, delivering the final blow with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I am announcing that every single dollar collected here today will be seized and applied directly to the $2 million debt that Richard and Beatrice owe to my company. Consider it a down payment on their fraud. I stepped back from the podium. The silence was broken by a single slow clap. It was Marcus. He was standing at the back of the church, clapping slowly, his face grim but satisfied. Then another person clapped. Then another. It wasn't applause for a performance. It was the applause of people who hated being lied to. It was the applause of people who respected power. I walked down the steps. I walked past the casket. I didn't look at it. It was just a box now, a box containing a liar. I walked past Beatrice. She didn't look up. She was finished. She was a pariah. I walked down the long center aisle. The guests parted for me like the Red Sea. They looked at me with fear and awe. They knew I was the one who had paid for the flowers. They knew I was the one who had paid for the silence until the moment it no longer served me. I pushed open the heavy oak doors of the cathedral and stepped out into the blinding sunlight. The air was fresh. I took a deep breath. I checked my phone. My lawyer had just messaged me. The lien on the penthouse had been filed. The eviction notice for Beatrice's house was being served as we spoke. It was over. I had lost a husband, but I had regained my life. And as I walked toward my car, I realized that for the first time in 10 years, I was completely and utterly free. The lawyer's office was cold and sterile, a sharp contrast to the suffocating scent of lilies that still clung to our clothes. We sat around a long glass conference table in a high-rise building that looked down on the city. I sat at one end. Beatrice and Caroline sat at the other. Marcus stood by the window looking out at the skyline, his back turned to his wife and mother-in-law. He had not spoken a word to them since we left the church. Beatrice was trying to regain her composure. The humiliation at the cathedral had shattered her, but the prospect of money was the glue holding her together. She believed that despite the scandal, despite the affair, and despite my public exposure of her lies, she was still the primary beneficiary of Richard's estate. She believed that the law would protect a mother's right to her son's wealth, regardless of her moral bankruptcy. Mr. Henderson, the family probate attorney, sat in the middle shuffling papers. He looked uncomfortable. He had served the Reynolds family for years, and he had seen them at their best. Now he was seeing them at their absolute worst. "Let's get this over with," Beatrice said, her voice raspy from crying but sharp with greed. I want to know when the funds will be released. We have bills to pay. The funeral home is calling about the declined card, and I need to settle the catering. Plus, Caroline and I need to book a trip. We need to get away from this city until the gossip dies down. Caroline nodded vigorously. Yes, the insurance payout. Richard had a $5 million policy. I remember because he bragged about it at Christmas. He said if anything happened to him, we would be set for life. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I watched them count money that didn't exist. It was almost pitiful. They were like passengers on the Titanic rearranging the deck chairs while the water lapped at their ankles. Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He looked at me, then at Beatrice. Mrs. Reynolds, regarding the estate, he began tentatively. We have a few complications. Complications, Beatrice snapped. What complications? Richard is dead. I am his mother. Victoria is his wife. We split everything. That is how it works. I want the house transferred to my name immediately. I can't go back to my own house, not with the eviction notice Victoria sent. I will move into Richard's house. It is big enough for Caroline and me. I leaned forward slightly. The leather of my chair creaked in the silence. You seem to be under a misapprehension, Beatrice, I said, my voice calm and level. You assume Richard owned the house. Beatrice frowned. Of course he owned it. He lived there for 5 years. He renovated the kitchen. He built the pool. He lived there, I corrected her, but he did not own it. I signaled to Mr. Henderson. He pulled out a property deed and slid it across the glass table. The house at 42 Oakwood Drive is the sole property of VR Holdings, LLC, Mr. Henderson explained. That is a limited liability company owned 100% by Victoria. Richard was not on the deed. He was not on the mortgage. Beatrice stared at the document. But he said it was his. He told everyone it was his. He lied, Beatrice, I said. Just like he lied about the London trip. Richard signed a lease agreement when he moved in. It was a condition of our marriage. I protect my assets. He was legally a tenant, an employee of my company who was granted executive housing as a perk of his employment. I paused, letting the reality sink in. And since his employment has been terminated due to death, the housing perk is also terminated. You have no claim to the house, Beatrice. None. Caroline gasped. But the cars, the Porsche, the Range Rover, company vehicles, I said simply. Leased by the firm. They will be returned to the dealership tomorrow. Beatrice's face turned a shade of gray that matched the overcast sky outside. Her hands began to shake. So he left nothing, she whispered. My son left me nothing. He left you his clothes, I said. And his watch collection, though most of them are replicas. You are welcome to those. Beatrice slammed her hand on the table. This is unacceptable. You tricked him. You trapped him in a marriage where he owned nothing. No wonder he needed an escape. No wonder he turned to Jessica. She looked at Mr. Henderson with desperate eyes. The insurance she demanded. The life insurance. That is separate from the property. He had a policy, a big one, $5 million, and I know for a fact that he listed me as a 50% beneficiary. He told me, he said, Mom, I made sure you are taken care of no matter what Victoria does. Mr. Henderson looked down at his files. He looked pained. Yes, Mrs. Reynolds, there is a policy, $5 million with unassigned beneficiaries, which would typically default to the next of kin. Beatrice sat back, letting out a long breath of relief. She smiled a twisted, triumphant smile. There, she said, looking at me with pure venom. You can keep your house, Victoria. You can keep your company cars. $5 million is more than enough. I will take my share, and I will make sure everyone knows how you treated us. We will be fine. We will be better than fine. I looked at Marcus. He turned away from the window. He walked to the table and placed his briefcase on the glass surface. The sound was heavy and final. He opened the case and pulled out a document. It wasn't a will. It was the toxicology report from London attached to the insurance policy terms. Marcus spoke, his voice devoid of the warmth he used to show them. He spoke like the prosecutor he was. Beatrice, there is a clause in every major life insurance policy called the illegal acts exclusion, Marcus said. Beatrice frowned. What are you talking about? Richard didn't commit a crime. He died in his sleep. Marcus slid the toxicology report toward her. Richard died from a combination of carbon monoxide and a massive overdose of cocaine, Marcus said. The police found 3 ounces of Class A narcotics in the room. In the UK, possession of that amount is a felony, trafficking weight. Beatrice shook her head. No, that is a lie. It is a forensic fact, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly. And under Clause 4, Section B of his insurance policy, if the insured dies while committing a felony, or as a result of using illegal narcotics, the policy is void. Void. Beatrice repeated the word as if it were a foreign language. Null and void, Marcus said. The insurance company has already flagged the claim. I spoke to their adjusters this morning. Because of the drugs and because of the circumstances of his death, they are denying the payout. Total silence filled the room. The $5 million had evaporated into thin air, just like their reputation. Zero, Beatrice, Marcus said brutally. You get 0. Caroline started to cry softly. We are broke, she sobbed. We have nothing. Mom has debt. I have debt. We were counting on this. Beatrice sat frozen. Her eyes were wide and unseeing. She had lost the house. She had lost the cars. She had lost the insurance. She was stripped bare. But I wasn't finished. There was one final layer to this tragedy. The payoff that would ensure she didn't just walk away poor, but walked away ruined. I stood up and walked to the other end of the table. I stood directly behind Beatrice. I looked down at her elaborate hairdo, now slightly disheveled. You are not just broke, Beatrice, I said softly. It is worse than that. She looked up at me slowly. Her eyes were full of fear. What do you mean, she whispered. Mr. Henderson, please show her the loan documents for the penthouse, I said. Mr. Henderson hesitated, then pulled out the final file. He opened it to the signature page. When Richard stole the $2 million from my trust, he didn't just wire it, I explained. He used it as a down payment. The penthouse cost $4 million. He took out a private loan for the remaining $2 million. A high-interest loan from a private equity lender. I pointed to the signature at the bottom of the page. Since Richard didn't have the assets to back the loan, the lender required a guarantor, someone to co-sign, someone who would be responsible for the debt if Richard defaulted or died. Beatrice looked at the signature. It was her own. I remember this, she stammered. Richard said it was just a formality. He said it was for the business. He said I was just witnessing his signature. You didn't read it, did you, Beatrice? I asked, my voice cold. You were so eager to help him hide his assets from me. You were so happy to help him build his secret life with Jessica that you signed whatever he put in front of you. I leaned in closer. You signed a personal guarantee, Beatrice. You are personally liable for the $2 million debt, plus the interest which is accruing daily. Beatrice made a choking sound. I don't have $2 million. I don't have anything. Exactly, I said. I straightened up and looked at her with pity. Not the warm pity of a friend, but the cold pity of a victor looking at a defeated enemy. The lender will come for everything I said. Your house, your jewelry, your pension, even that dress you are wearing. They will take it all. And since the penthouse was purchased with stolen funds from my company, I have placed a primary lien on it, which means when they sell it, the money goes to me first, not to pay off your loan. You will still owe the bank, Beatrice. You will be in debt for the rest of your life. Beatrice looked at Marcus pleading. Marcus, do something. You are a lawyer. Fix this. Tell her she can't do this. Marcus looked at his mother-in-law. He looked at the woman who had enabled the affair that killed 2 people. He looked at the woman who had tried to get him to commit fraud. I can't fix it, Beatrice, Marcus said coldly. You signed the paper. You wanted to be part of Richard's life so badly. Well, now you are part of his debt. It is ironclad. He picked up his briefcase and walked over to stand next to me. I suggest you find a bankruptcy attorney, Marcus said. I won't be representing you. Beatrice put her head on the table and wailed. It was a guttural, animalistic sound of total despair. Caroline sat next to her, weeping silently, realizing her free ride was over forever. I looked at Mr. Henderson. Thank you for your time, I said. Please proceed with the asset seizure of the penthouse. I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking on the polished floor. Marcus followed me. We left them there in the glass tower high above the world they could no longer afford. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the sound of Beatrice's sobbing, leaving only the quiet hum of victory. 2 hours later, I pulled into the driveway of the estate that Beatrice had called home for 30 years. It was a sprawling colonial mansion with ivy climbing the brick walls and a manicured lawn that cost more to maintain than most people earned in a year. For decades, Beatrice had reigned here like a queen, holding court in the garden room and hosting charity teas where she judged the women of the neighborhood based on their pearl necklaces. She had convinced everyone, including herself, that this house was the ancestral seat of the Reynolds dynasty. But as I parked my car behind the sheriff's cruiser, I looked at the house and saw it for what it really was. It was an asset listed on line 4 of the spreadsheet for VR Holdings LLC, an asset that was currently occupied by a delinquent tenant with 0 credit rating and a negative net worth. I stepped out of the car. The air was thick with the sound of chaos. Professional movers were marching in and out of the front door, carrying boxes and furniture. They worked with the efficiency of ants dismantling a picnic. I had hired them to pack only personal effects. Anything that belonged to the house, including the antique furniture, the art collection, and the silver service remained. Beatrice was leaving with her clothes, her vanity, and her shame. Nothing more. Beatrice was standing on the front porch, clinging to the doorframe as if she could physically anchor herself to the property. She was still wearing the black dress from the funeral, but it was rumpled now, stained with tears and desperation. Her hair, once a helmet of perfect lacquer, was coming undone. She looked less like a matriarch and more like a madwoman. "You cannot do this," she screamed at a sheriff's deputy who was standing calmly at the bottom of the steps, holding a clipboard. "This is my home. I have lived here since 1985. My husband bought this house. My son grew up here. You cannot just throw a widow onto the street." The deputy looked bored. He had seen this scene 1,000 times. "Ma'am, the deed belongs to the corporation. The eviction order is signed by the owner. You have been given notice. You need to vacate the premises immediately, or I will have to escort you off the property for trespassing." I walked up the driveway, my heels crunching on the gravel. Beatrice saw me. Her eyes bulged with rage. "You!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You devil! You did this! You told them to come here!" I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at her. I did not raise my voice. I did not need to. The law was shouting for me. "I am the owner of this property, Beatrice," I said, my voice carrying clearly in the afternoon silence. "And as the owner, I have the right to evict squatters, especially ones who default on their moral and financial obligations." "Squatter," she sputtered. "I am your mother-in-law. I am a Reynolds. You are a liability," I corrected her. "You are a woman who signed a guarantee for a loan she couldn't pay to help her son cheat on his wife. You gambled this house on Richard's secret life, and you lost. The bank was going to take it eventually, Beatrice. I am just speeding up the process to save the equity." I signaled to the movers. "Keep going. Clear the master bedroom." Beatrice lunged forward, trying to block the doorway, but she was weak. She collapsed against the pillar, sobbing. "Where will I go?" she wailed. "I have nowhere. The club has suspended my membership because of the check I bounced. My friends won't answer my calls. You have turned everyone against me." "I didn't turn them against you, Beatrice," I said. "The truth did. They know about Richard and Jessica. They know you condoned it. People can forgive bankruptcy. They can forgive divorce. But they cannot forgive what you allowed to happen in that hotel room. You are not just poor now. You are toxic." I looked down the street. Curtains were twitching in the neighboring houses. The neighbors, the people Beatrice had tried so hard to impress for decades, were watching. They weren't coming to help. They were watching the fall of the Reynolds empire with the morbid curiosity of drivers slowing down for a car crash. Beatrice saw them too. She saw Mrs. Higgins from across the street peering through her blinds. The shame hit her harder than the poverty. She shrank back, covering her face with her hands. Just then the front door opened and Marcus walked out. He was carrying 2 large duffel bags. He wasn't wearing his funeral suit anymore. He had changed into jeans and a t-shirt. He looked younger, lighter. Caroline came running out behind him, mascara streaming down her face. She grabbed his arm, trying to pull him back. "Marcus, please stop," she begged. "You can't leave me here. Not now. Look at this mess. Mom is falling apart. We have no money. I need you. We need your salary. We need your help to fight this." Marcus stopped and gently removed her hand from his arm. It was the same gesture I had used on Beatrice earlier, a gesture of final detachment. Marcus walked down the stairs past Beatrice, who didn't even look up, and stopped in front of me. He put the bags down for a moment. He looked at the house, then he looked at me. There was no animosity in his eyes, only a deep, weary respect. "You warned them," he said quietly. I nodded. I did. Marcus looked at the sheriff and then back at me. "Beatrice signed the deed over to Richard's shell company years ago to hide it from tax collectors," he said. "I found the paperwork in the study. She forgot that by doing that, she gave you the power to take it back. It is poetic in a way." "It is business, Marcus," I said. He smiled a faint, tired smile. "You are going to be fine, Victoria," he said. "You were always the strongest one." He extended his hand. I took it. His grip was warm and solid. "Goodbye, Marcus," I said. "Take care of yourself." "You did the right thing," he said, squeezing my hand. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. You survived them. That is the only victory that matters." He picked up his bags and walked to his car. He didn't look back at Caroline, who was now sobbing on the lawn next to a pile of cardboard boxes. He got in, started the engine, and drove away, leaving the Reynolds family in the dust. I turned back to Beatrice. The movers had finished bringing out the last of her personal items: a Louis Vuitton trunk, a few suitcases, and a box of hats. That was it. 30 years of arrogance reduced to a pile of luggage on the curb. The deputy stepped forward. "Mrs. Reynolds, I need to lock the premises now. You need to step off the porch." Beatrice looked up at me one last time. Her eyes were hollow. "You win," she whispered. "Are you happy?" I looked at her. I didn't feel happy. Happiness was too light a word. I felt heavy with the satisfaction of a debt finally paid. "I am not happy, Beatrice," I said. "I am solvent." I turned and walked to my car. Behind me, I heard the heavy thud of the front door closing and the click of the deadbolt sliding home. It was the sound of a chapter ending. I got into my car and drove down the driveway past the pile of luggage, past the weeping women, and out onto the open road. I didn't look in the rearview mirror. I had a company to run. 6 months have passed since the day I walked out of St. Patrick's Cathedral and left the ruins of the Reynolds dynasty behind me. I am writing this from the balcony of my new office in London, overlooking the River Thames. It is ironic, really. London was the city where Richard went to destroy our marriage, so I decided to make it the city where I rebuilt my empire. I recently acquired the hotel group that owns the Savoy. I walked into the very suite where Richard and Jessica were found, and I didn't feel grief. I felt a sense of sterile closure. I ordered the room stripped and renovated. It is now the most expensive suite in the city, and every night it is booked by people who pay me for the privilege of sleeping in my victory. My business has tripled in value. The publicity from the funeral, strangely enough, worked in my favor. Clients want to trust their money with a woman who can uncover a complex financial fraud and dismantle a family estate in under 48 hours. They see me as ruthless and efficient. They are right. I am no longer the quiet wife in the background. I am the headline. I am beautiful. I am powerful. And for the first time in my life, I am entirely free of the dead weight of expectation. As for Beatrice and Caroline, the reality of their new life is far less glamorous. The bankruptcy court was not lenient. Beatrice was forced to sell every piece of jewelry she owned, including her engagement ring, to pay off a fraction of the debt she guaranteed. She lives in a small 2-room apartment in a neighborhood she used to make fun of. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she still tries to attend the local church, but the society ladies she once ruled now look through her as if she were made of glass. She is alone with her moth-eaten furs and the memories of a status she can never regain. Caroline fared no better. Marcus was granted a quick divorce, and he kept his assets. He is thriving now, free from the toxic pull of his wife's family. Caroline, however, had no resume and no skills other than spending money. Last week I had a business meeting in her town, and I stopped at a grocery store to buy a bottle of water. I chose the 3rd register. Caroline was the cashier. She wore a polyester uniform that was too big for her. When she looked up and saw me, her hands froze over the scanner. She didn't speak. She couldn't. She just scanned my water bottle and handed me the receipt. I took it and wished her a good day. She looked at my hand where my wedding ring used to be, and then at her own hands, which were red and chapped. I walked out to my car and didn't look back. Justice doesn't need to shout. Sometimes it just needs to buy a bottle of water.